Louise of Savoy ruled as Regent of France for her son, Francis I. The 15th century was a particularly unsettled time in France, since King Francis I was often at war with various other powers of Europe, most notably the Holy Roman Emperor. But fortunately for him, he had been raised by a very powerful and determined woman, Louise of Savoy. Throughout her son's reign, she proved just as skilled as he was in the treacherous and dangerous world of politics. Louise was widely lauded by many for her intellect, no less a person than Charles Brandon, best friend and brother-in-law of England's Henry VIII, had many good things to say about her. For his part, Francis repeatedly demonstrated his faith in his mother's abilities, leaving the realm in her hands on several occasions, including when he was captured and held prisoner. While regent, Louise not only managed to negotiate his release, but also ably defended the entire realm and her own position, demonstrating his wisdom in leaving the realm in capable hands. Isabella of Castile unified Spain, but was ruthless to Jews and Muslims. One of the most formidable women of the Renaissance, along with her husband, Ferdinand of Aragon, she managed to forge Spain into a unified country. Most notably, she was key to the conquering of the peninsula, which would become known by historians as Reconquista. Isabella was also one of the key sponsors of Christopher Columbus and his voyages to the Americas. However, there was a darker side to Isabella's reign. During her time on the throne, the Inquisition became a formidable presence. Muslims and Jews in particular suffered, as did those who had recently converted to Catholicism. Notable in this regard was the expulsion of the Jews from Spain in 1492, a decision that would come to have significant political ramifications for the country in the future. Margaret Tudor showed a rebellious spirit against both her brother Henry VIII and the ruling Scottish lords. She was the sister of Henry VIII and the daughter of Henry VII, both of whom led very eventful lives. Margaret Tudor was someone who didn't want to obey the rules. When James IV of Scotland died, she moved quickly to take up the regency of the Kingdom of Scotland. She married Archibald Douglas, the Earl of Angus, but Margaret wasn't deterred from trying to exercise power in her own right. For the rest of her life, Margaret was determined to live life on her own terms. She managed to secure a divorce from her second husband and married yet again. Her third husband was Henry Stuart. Margaret also worked tirelessly to forge stronger bonds between her native England and her adopted Scotland, despite the long-standing animosity between the two nations. Mary I had her own cousin executed because she was a grave threat to her throne. For many years it seemed Mary Tudor would never inherit the throne of England, after her father Henry VIII had his marriage to her mother Catherine of Aragon annulled. Mary was declared illegitimate. Ultimately, once her younger brother Edward died, Mary Tudor managed to seize the throne for herself. This despite her cousin Lady Jane Grey's attempt to usurp it at the instigation of her father-in-law, John Dudley, she managed to seize the throne. Unfortunately, Lady Jane was still a problem and a source of potential unrest in the kingdom when, therefore, Thomas Wyatt the Younger led a rebellion, of which Jane's father was a part. Mary felt she had no choice but to have her young cousin executed. She did, however, offer Jane the chance of a reprieve if she converted to Catholicism. When she refused, she sent her to the block. Christina of Denmark became a duchess twice and made a snarky remark to King Henry VIII. Christina of Denmark was born into a nexus of important family relations, being both the niece of the Holy Roman Emperor and the daughter of the King of Denmark. Given her exalted status, she played a key role in her marriages. She first became a duchess when she was married to Francesco II Sforza, Duke of Milan. After his death and the several aborted alliances, she married for a second time to Francis, Duke of Bar. After the latter's death, she served for some time as the regent of Lorraine. Christina would also earn a place in the history books for a remark she made regarding Henry VIII. The English king's marital troubles were the talk of Europe. He divorced his first wife, beheaded his second, his third wife died in childbirth, and his fourth marriage was annulled. When a marriage was proposed, her portrait was even painted by the notable artist Hans Holbein. Christina said, "If I had two heads, one should be at the King of England's disposal." Mary, Queen of Scots, escaped from captivity and raised her own army. Few Renaissance figures led quite a tragic life as Mary, Queen of Scots. After being forced to flee her native Scotland at a young age, she spent her early years at the French court as wife of the Dauphin Francis. After his premature death, Mary returned to Scotland. However, she fell afoul of her lords who at one point even managed to imprison her on the island of Loch Leven. Ever resourceful, Mary managed to persuade her jailer into helping her escape, after which she managed to raise an army. They were ultimately defeated, forcing Mary to flee to England, where she would spend the rest of her life as a prisoner at the bequest of her cousin, Elizabeth I. Mary had a wild spirit and a willingness to fight for her crown to the very end. Amina, Queen of Zazzau, expanded the borders of her kingdom. Amina, the Queen of the Kingdom of Zazzau, located in modern-day Nigeria, ruled during the 16th century like her European counterparts such as Isabella of Castile. She was a formidable warrior queen. She is noted for her cavalry skills. As a result of her efforts, she not only expanded her domains, but also came to dominate several notable trade routes. To this day, she is regarded as a historical hero, and several statues of her still exist. Margaret De Navarre was a patron of the arts and even composed her own works. She would play a key part in the politics of the age, marrying firstly Charles IV and on his death Henry II of Navarre. She would become known as one of the most educated women of her age. She surrounded herself with the most learned writers and thinkers, and she repeatedly showed herself willing to engage with the task of reforming the Catholic Church. Not content to simply read ferociously, she also embarked on a remarkable writing career. These included her most famous works, the religious poem Mirror of the Sinful Soul, and a collection of short stories, which remained unfinished at her death. Elizabeth I kept her royal suitors believing she might marry one of them, even though she had no intention of doing so. When Elizabeth I took the throne of England, her country was in a state of unrest, having endured the tumultuous reigns of her father and two siblings. Thus, from the beginning, Elizabeth made sure to do everything in her power to keep her country stable, no matter the cost. During the early years of her reign, she held out the possibility of marriage to various men from European powers. Since none of them believed a woman could continue ruling in her own name, they all seemed to believe they had an actual chance of marrying her, and in so doing, ruling the country in her name. In truth, however, Elizabeth had no intention of actually marrying any of them, for a variety of reasons, both political and personal. She decided never to marry. Despite this, the marriage game she played with her various suitors over the years played a key role in her foreign policy, and they contributed to the safety of her realm. In the end, however, the Virgin Queen remained what she claimed to be, married to her nation, an icon her people could believe in. Isabella d'Este was a canny ruler and also established her own art space. Born into the ducal family of Ferrara, Isabella d'Este was no stranger to wealth and power and privilege. In fact, her home city was renowned for its sophistication, boasting one of the most respectful universities in Europe. However, like many women of the age, she was also fated to be a pawn on the marriage market. She was ultimately married to Francesco II of Mantua. She became one of her husband's key advisors. Just as importantly, however, she also proved to be a true Renaissance woman. She was interested in numerous spheres of knowledge, and she maintained an extensive correspondence with many other leaders of the day. What's more, she also managed to accumulate an impressive art collection, and she is believed to be the first European woman to have her own personal gallery space. Catherine of Aragon led English forces to battle against the Scots and won. Raised by the redoubtable Isabella of Castile, Catherine of Aragon was raised with a strong sense of her own importance and royal dignity. She was also primed for an illustrious marriage, which took place when she was wed to Arthur, the heir to the English throne. After his premature death, she was married to his younger brother, the future King Henry VIII. From the beginning, Catherine showed she was her mother's daughter, with a shrewd political mind and natural charisma that endeared her to the English people. She also proved her mettle when it came to defending England from the Scots. When Henry departed for war in France, Catherine was left in charge of England as regent. When the Scottish king decided to invade, the Queen took matters into her own hands, actively working for the defence of her adopted realm. Though she probably didn't lead her troops into battle, despite some popular cultural representations, she nevertheless donned armour and showed how much she was her mother's daughter. Thanks in part to Catherine's efforts, the English were overwhelmingly victorious at the Battle of Flodden. Catherine de' Medici probably approved the assassination of one of her most notable enemies. When she first came to the French court, few would have suspected Catherine de' Medici would become one of the most savviest political strategists of her generation. When her husband, King Henry II of France, died, she wielded significant influence over her young sons as they each came to the throne. Most notably, she is believed to have been responsible, or at least complicit, in the attempted assassination of one of the leading Protestants in France. When this effort failed, Catherine, along with her other Catholic nobles, decided the threat from the angered Protestants, known as Huguenots, was too great to ignore, and thus ordered the death of many of them. This event would thereafter be known as the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Margaret of Austria served as a capable regent in the Netherlands and was a canny negotiator. During the 15th century, Margaret of Austria was one of the century's most eligible and desirable brides. After spending time in France as a potential bride for the heir, Margaret instead married Jean, Prince of Asturias, heir to the Spanish throne. After his death, she married Philibert II, Duke of Savoy. The death of her second husband prompted Margaret's father, Maximilian, the Holy Roman Emperor, to give her control the Low Countries on behalf of her young nephew. In the position, she not only managed to raise her young nieces and nephews, but also skillfully negotiate with other European powers, particularly England. She achieved her greatest fame with the Treaty of Cambria, because it was hammered out with Louise of Savoy, became known as the Lady's Peace. Queen Ana Nzinga became a noted diplomat in her brother's court and later became ruler in her own right. She was one of the most formidable women of Renaissance Africa. Born in the later 16th century in the kingdom of Ndango in modern-day Angola, she would become a key part of her brother's court. In fact, he appointed her to a mission to the Portuguese, who were making incursions into the kingdom. After her brother's death, possibly by suicide, though Anna might have had a role in it, she ascended to the position of queen in her own right. She would continue to fight against European incursions into her territory with only limited success. After being forced to flee her own kingdom, she would later assume control of her neighbouring realm, Mataba. To the end of her life, she would live to be in her 80s. She never stopped fighting against those who would conquer her people. Nurbanu Sultan hid her husband's body in a chest until her son could return to take the throne. Though the women of Renaissance Europe tend to take up much of the space in the history books, there was also a number of other women in other regions who were able to wield significant influence. In the Ottoman Empire, the various wives of the Sultan had long managed to exert their power behind the scenes as they attempted to get their sons ahead in the line of succession. One particular note in this regard was Nabano Sultan, a Venetian woman who became the consort of Sultan Selim. She bore her husband several children, including his heir, Murad. When her husband died, she hid his body in a chest, giving her son time to return to the empire to claim his throne. She would leverage her position in his court, becoming one of his chief counsellors. She would even go on to correspond with some of the other formidable women of the age, including Catherine de Medici of France. And this concludes the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please click the like button, give it a thumbs up, and please subscribe for future videos. Thank you.